Alrighty. Welcome to the daily market wrap, the biggest charts in 30 minutes. We're going to run down all of the hottest plays from the last 24 hours and from earlier this week. And, where I want to start things off here is actually with Solana. But before I do that, I just want to remind everyone, just like, share, subscribe. If you find value in this technical analysis, please take a look at DeFiUniversity.xyz. I think that you'll find a lot of value in the free educational content there. Courses.DeFiUniversity.xyz, totally free. And those are, I think, the best DeFi and crypto courses in the English language. I turn them into books also. And those books are available in paperback and ebook format over on Amazon. So let's hop in. Let's take a look at Solana. Now, this is one of my highest conviction short plays. Now, why? Well, the reason why it's such a high conviction short play for me is this head and shoulders pattern. Now, this is a daily chart on Solana. So really beautiful head and shoulders. That is a very bearish price action pattern here. Now, notice the level of support that Solana is currently sitting at right here, 95 bucks. So that is a significant level of long-term support. That is where Solana found support. What was that? I can't even see underneath this StreamYard thing, but the level is 95. If 95 breaks to the downside, and it doesn't matter if it breaks tomorrow or if it breaks next week or if it breaks next month after there is a rally at some point, if that level breaks, there really isn't anything by way of support until Solana gets down to $33. So that is a big, big move on the downside from the $95 level all the way down to, let's say, 33. That's a 65% move. Okay, and that could happen really, really fast. Solana is an extremely volatile altcoin, so this could move quickly. And if I'm trying to play over the next couple of months for a 65% move on the downside out of Sol, that means I don't need to use any leverage at all. So if you want to use leverage, maybe think about 1.5x or maybe 2x. Now, if you're a complete degenerate gambler like I am sometimes, maybe you take a look at 5 or 10x. And if you really, really, really just want to, see if, YOLO and find out, well, 20x would be crazy. So I'm trading this with no leverage. I'm just short spot, because I think that a 65% move is worth it to just hold it for a couple of weeks or maybe a couple of months. So that's what I'm looking forward to out of Solana. Let's go ahead and bring it on over here to BTC. Now, there's been a big development in Bitcoin just as of the session today. So let me go ahead and zoom in here so I can share that with you guys. On the hourly, take a look at the breakdown. So we got a little bit of a false breakdown today on the hourly. And let me just go ahead and circle that with the brush right here. So that Bitcoin orange level, that is the level of support from back in April of last year, the tariff tantrum lows. So if I just go ahead and zoom out a little bit here from an hourly to a 4-hour, we'll be able to see that. So there's the tariff tantrum low from back in April of 2025, April of last year. So that is the level of support. But if you zoom in to the hourly, you'll be able to see that that level of support broke during the session today. Now, it broke and we did get a bounce here. This is a bounce. It flagged off and pushing higher. So bounced off of, after breaking down. But in my opinion, now that that level has broken, even though we did get the bounce, now that that level is broken, I think that it's going to open the floodgates at some point over the next couple of days or couple of weeks. And if I zoom out here one more time, we might actually see Bitcoin down here, with a 60 handle, before the month of February is out. It would not surprise me to see Bitcoin all the way down at 62K or maybe even as low as 59K, by the end of February, or maybe at some point in early March. So I think that this probably continues. And, what would be one of the catalysts for this sell-off to continue? Well, why don't we go ahead and take a look at the NASDAQ? Now, I know the NASDAQ is not all that positively correlated with Bitcoin anymore, but if the NASDAQ and equities in general start to sell off even a little bit, I don't think that that means that Bitcoin and digital assets would suddenly like find a bid. I think if equities sell off, digital assets would just sell off by more. So let's go ahead and just take a look at this real quick. This is an interesting pattern. So let's go ahead and just take a look at this pattern one more time. So notice from back in December of 2024, and then the high, this was actually last February. So this is the NASDAQ. And last February, the NASDAQ put in this interesting double top. See, there's the old high. There's the double top right there. That becomes resistance. And then if I throw down a 100-day moving average here, we've got the trend line support, and importantly, the 100-day moving average below also. So last February, when trend line support broke after the NASDAQ put in that double top, and importantly, when the 100-day moving average broke to the downside, that was the beginning of the correction that led into that trough down there during the tariff tantrum lows that was on April 7th. So at this breaking to the downside, this is the 100-day moving average. If we see something similar over here, well, let's just check it out. So look, there's the all-time high right there in the NASDAQ. And here, just a couple of sessions ago, we put in a slightly lower high. There's your double top. Looks just like the double top from last year. And here's the 100-day moving average. Here's the 100-day moving average last February. Now, here's trendline support. And here's trendline support from last year. So if the NASDAQ breaks trendline support and its 100-day moving average, then I think we would see the same exact pattern play out that we saw play out last year, where we get a little bit of a correction in the first half of the year that ends up being an amazing buying opportunity. And then the rest of the year, markets just go straight up like they did last year. You know, that's just my speculation here. So if the NASDAQ sells off, well, then I think Bitcoin probably has not put in a trough at 74K. So if equities start to move lower, I think that this level out of Bitcoin at 73.3 that was put in earlier today, I think that will not be the trough. And that would mean that if Bitcoin continues moving to the downside, it might have an additional 20 or so percent to go on the downside. So what would that mean for altcoins? Well, let's take a look. Here's Ethereum. So Ethereum bounced a little bit off of its level of support at 2120, but notice it put in a slightly lower low. So did Bitcoin. Bitcoin put in a lower low than its April 2025 low. So this low that was put in today is slightly lower than the Iran strike lows on ETH from last year. So that tells me that this level of support has been broken. And I think that ETH probably puts in an even lower low, maybe somewhere around 1600 or so on Ethereum. But I would be a buyer of Ethereum at 1600. So just let me zoom out here. We can take a look at this a little bit more clearly. So this trend line support is anchored to the bear market lows for ETH from last bear market. And those lows were put in actually early in the bear. So June 2022, those lows were put in, and hey, that's the anchor point for this trend line. Now I connect that trend line to the next higher low and extend to the right. And that gives me long-term trend line support here. So with that level of long-term trend line support, let's just take a look at where we find that support in dollars, right around 1580 or 1600. So it would not surprise me if the NASDAQ starts to correct, that Ethereum breaks below 2120 and moves just about in a straight line to 1600, where I think there is stronger or longer term trend line support. So we started off taking a look at Solana, and hey, now that we've taken a look at Bitcoin, Ethereum, and the NASDAQ, if we view Solana through the lens of Bitcoin, Ethereum, and the NASDAQ, well, what does that mean if Solana breaks 95? If Solana breaks 95 and Bitcoin moves to 60 and ETH moves to 1600, then I think Solana moves in a straight line down to at least $40, but maybe as low as $30. So Solana is one of my highest conviction shorts. I am short Sol. Let's take a look over here at some other altcoins. Here's SUI, SUI. So SUI is a new, supposedly high performance chain. It's had a difficult time really attracting DeFi TVL. And, if I'm going to provide liquidity somewhere or operate in DeFi or, create a vault or build a product, I'm going to do it on Ethereum, not on SUI necessarily. So I'm sure that there's a use case for this chain, but it's also in its first cycle. And it's also very inflationary. And just about every month, there are token unlocks. I think the team probably gets a large allocation of those unlocks. So this is a very inflationary, low float, high FDV token. And so that tells me that during a bear market, this thing should get trounced. And I see a level of support right here at $1.30 that broke just last week. And now that that level has broken, if we zoom in a little bit here so we can see this more clearly. So now that that level has broken, what type of pattern is this, you guys? You see this? That is the pole, and here's the flag. So SUI is flagging off. Now, if this flag completes, that would mean continued downside, and I really don't see any reasonable level of support on the way down for SUI until we get down to this zone down here, maybe around like 55 or 60 cents. That might be a level where SUI pauses for a moment on the way down. But hey, think about that in percentage terms. So if we're currently trading for $1.13 and SUI moves down to the top of my little buy zone, well, then that's a 50% move. And that means you don't need to use any leverage. If you're trading perps, instead of trying to use leverage, make sure that you watch the funding rate, because that is, I think, more important. So if you're not going to trade with leverage, then you've got to track the funding rate for whatever perp stacks you're trading on. If you're going to get short this thing and you're going to use 1x leverage, so zero leverage, make sure that funding does not get too positive. If funding is positive and you're short, you're going to earn that funding. If funding is negative and you're short, you're going to pay that funding. So just be careful. If funding becomes very negative, you wouldn't want to have to hold that short position open for too long. So just keep that in mind. But this is a really interesting looking short setup for me. And I am short SUI, and I will remain short SUI all the way down to 50 cents. I think it moves down to 50 cents. Let's take a look at Link. Okay, so Link has a little bit of an interesting head and shoulders pattern that it's put in here. And I want to go ahead and remove that 100-day moving average there. So we've got the head and shoulders pattern, but Link also has this channel that it carved out during the previous bear market. So the top of this channel here comes in at $9.66 or so. Now, Link is testing this level as we speak. It already broke down below it, however. So the fact that it already broke down below it tells me that this level probably will not hold as support. I bet this breaks. And so if Link re-enters this channel that it carved out during the previous bear market, well, then I think it probably moves down towards the bottom third of the channel, something like $5 or so, maybe even to the very bottom of the channel at $4.50. So that's a big move. If Link moves, down from $9.60 to, let's say, the middle of the channel, that's nearly a 30% move. If it moves all the way down to the bottom of the channel, that all of a sudden is a 50% move. So again, you don't need to use leverage if you think that you're in a trade for a 50% move. So yeah, just make sure that you track funding. That's the important thing. Link, I am short Link. let's move on to XRP. Alrighty, so XRP, the level of support in XRP was $1.77. And now that that level has broken, well, we're basically just hanging out in this no man's land here. There really is not any decent support at all in XRP until the crash lows at $1.25. And even that is not very good support. So I think that XRP probably ends up moving down to 60 cents. So that is my target on the short side. Now, I will not be a buyer of XRP at 60 cents. I'll just close my shorts if it gets down there. And I'll start to take profit down around 70 cents or so. But I'll never buy XRP because it doesn't do anything. So, yeah, I think this is a short. And if we measure this real quick, so from the current price down to 60 cents, that's negative 60%. So again, you don't need to use leverage for a trade like this. All you got to do is track the funding rate on the perp stacks that you're trading XRP on. Let's take a look at AVAX, Avalanche. So I actually like the Avalanche protocol. I think that they have an opportunity to maybe, build something that people actually use at some point, maybe, hopefully. But as of right now, this pattern, I'm thinking that AVAX could even move down to these levels down here, like $5 AVAX, something like that. So let's go ahead and zoom in on the daily so we can see this a bit more clearly. So when this level at 1130 broke, that level of support, when it broke, it became resistance. And now we get a little bit of a flag here. So AVAX is flagging off on the way down. And let me just take a look. You see this level of support from back here? That is the level of support at $8.50. The level of resistance now is at $11.28. And so AVAX is just in this little channel here. So if this level of support breaks at $8.50, then I think AVAX could move all the way down to $5. And I'd be a buyer from 8 to 5. So from $8 to $5, I'd be a buyer of AVAX. Just buy it spot, hold it in a Harbor wallet, and wait for the next bull cycle to begin. So this looks like an interesting short to me, but not a high conviction short. And, look, if it gets all the way down to the bottom of my buy zone, that's a 46% move. If it only moves to the bottom of the channel, that's 15%. I am not currently short AVAX. But I'm going to continue to watch this one. Let's take a look at Tau, Tensor Tau. So this is actually one of my favorite protocols just because it's a very interesting project. But this is the level to watch, $170. So the last time 170 was touched was during the tariff tantrum sell-off. And the time before that was actually, I think, the yen carry trade unwind back in the summer of 2024. So if 170 gets touched again, that would be the third touch, the third test of 170, where I think it would break. And if 170 breaks, then Tau would likely move down to 90. And if it doesn't hold 90, then the better level of support would be at like 35 or 40 or so. So I'll be a buyer of Tau at 90 down to 40, although I would probably wait and pick it up at like 50 or 60 bucks if it gets into this region down here. Okay, so let's take a look at Aave. And then I want to take a look at some of these total market cap charts. So Aave is, an Ethereum virtual machine like ecosystem token. This is a governance token, a protocol token over here, Aave, AAVE. Take a look at this long-term level of trendline support. And Aave is currently sitting at trendline support. So we can see that here. It's sitting at trendline support and it's flagging off. So a break of trendline support, and that trendline support comes in at roughly $116. If that breaks, I think Aave goes to 80 bucks. And that could happen quickly. And so although I don't have any open short positions on Aave right now, this is actually an interesting trade. A break of trendline support and a move down to 80 on Aave. And I would actually consider buying this one if I could pick it up between 40 and 80 bucks. That seems like a decent long just to hold its spot. I like the Aave protocol. So yeah, looks like an interesting short play on a breakdown to me. Let's take a look at Hyperliquid, HYPE, HYPE. So this is a really big topping tail. Interesting pattern, big trend line resistance. We got the breakout. All the wicks on the bottom tell me that there's buying pressure there, but the wick on the top, this is a big topping tail. So maybe HYPE just moves back down and tests support one more time. But the thing about Hyperliquid is that they generate a ton of free cash flow and return that free cash flow to token holders. So this is a project that, as long as they continue to generate free cash flow and return it to token holders, I think HYPE continues to survive and do well. Okie dokie, we've got 10 minutes left. Let's see, what else do we want to talk about? I think I want to go ahead and take a look at Total. And this is just going to give me an opportunity to explain why I think there's more room on the downside for all of crypto. So if we just take a look at this long-term trend line support here, you see this? This is anchored all the way back to the beginning of the bull market in 2023 in October, which I think was the start of the bull. So this trend line is then connected to the next higher low and then extended to the right. And notice it was support here, support here, support again here, and then recently it broke. And when this level of important long-term trend line support broke, it became resistance. But notice there is no support until this moves a little bit lower. So that's, $250 billion. That's $250 billion to go from 2.55 trillion to 2.3 trillion. That is 250, or how much is that? Yeah, that's $250 billion. So that would be, a further downside move of almost 10%. So I think that, the entire crypto space probably has another 10% at least on the downside left. Now, if we take a look at altcoins, and we can take a look at altcoins by viewing Total 3, altcoins put in a bit of a double top here. And here's that same level of trend line support. Here's the breakdown. Here's support here, that horizontal at 662 billion. So that's another 12 percentage points on the downside. So, it looks like although Total might move lower by 10 points, the alts probably underperform Bitcoin. Now, if we take a look at Total DeFi, these are, mostly Ethereum virtual machine protocol tokens. These alts in the Total DeFi market cap basket on TradingView. But notice the pattern. Here's the pattern. Long-term trendline support is being held right now. But if that long-term trendline support were to break, and we just go ahead and measure that from the current price, well, that would be 22% on the downside to this level of support. And importantly, it would be a trend line break. So the only level of support will be the horizontal all the way down until you get all the way down to these bear market lows down here. So this is like make or break time for Total DeFi. And if it breaks 20% of the downside, well, that would mean that like Aave breaks down. Take a look at just about any altcoin, it would probably break down. So quite a bit more room on the downside, I think, out of alts. Let's take a look here at gold and silver to wrap things up. So here is gold. And, it is very difficult to analyze a parabola. And so rather than trying to just, shoot in the dark and find a level of support and a level of resistance, sometimes what I like to do is zoom out from a daily to a weekly. And from there, I want to use a Fibonacci. So I'm going to use a Fibonacci retracement from the highs all the way down to like a trough down here at maybe $1,000. And that should give us some interesting levels of support and interesting levels on the way up of resistance. So let's just take a look at this. There's only a few levels that are actually meaningful, I think. It's the 618 on the downside. That would be the 618 retracement. I'm going to go ahead and mark that with a horizontal right there. And the 618 extension, which would be up here. And then you could mark the 382s. Those can be important sometimes. I'm just going to go ahead and mark those 382s. So the 382 right there. And then the 382 on the upside is like, I think it's much, yeah, there isn't even a 382 on the upside. So now that I've marked off those levels, I'm going to go ahead and remove the Fibonacci. And so what that is saying is there's support. Look at that. Look at how that support aligns with where price found support. That's so interesting. So it looks like 3,800 is a significant level of support. And now that we've zoomed out to a weekly, take a look at this pattern where you've got the big topping tail on the weekly, and now you've got the big bull hammer. So you had the bear hammer with the topping tail and the bull hammer so far this week. Now it's only Tuesday, but the bear hammer and the bull hammer with the topping tail and the bottoming tail, I don't know that you could really call that a bottoming tail, although it technically probably is. This just signals to me a lot of indecision. That's what this signals to me. And of course, a lot of volatility. Let's take a look at gold volatility, GVZ. So when gold volatility spikes, that tends to mark either a lot of volatility in markets broadly speaking, or some type of a top or bottom out of gold itself. So the last time we saw gold vol this high was all the way back in 2020. That was the March crash of the stock market back in 2020 in March. So, this move higher out of gold volatility, it could, of course, continue to move higher. But, if we just take a look back here, this move to the upside out of gold vol, that was during the Lehman Brothers, sell-off and crash in 2008. So, every single time we've seen gold vol spike, it was either the Lehman crash or the COVID pandemic crash, or, here, 2011, that was the last big major rally out of gold. But here, current day, it looks like either we haven't quite seen the top yet, or the top is in and vol starts to mean revert. So I think we'll know if the top is in if gold volatility starts to mean revert, because if it does, then we might see price start to taper off to the downside a little bit. Let's take a look next at silver, and then we're going to call it a night. Okay, so this is silver on a weekly. Let's repeat that same exercise and use a Fibonacci and throw down a couple of levels just to see if it aligns with anything else that we see. Okay, so from the all-time high down to an important low, and now I just want to go ahead and mark the 618 right there, and I want to mark the 382 right there, and then I want to mark the extension, the 618 extension right there. And then I'll go ahead and remove that Fibonacci, and now we can take a look at this. Okay, so number one, the extension is all the way up at $186. So that's a big move. But this is the 618 retracement, and that comes in at $81. So maybe that could be a level of support, potentially. I think better support in silver comes in the 50s, like $58 or so. But, who knows what this is going to do, because parabolas are just so difficult to trade. That's why I prefer simply to watch them from the sidelines rather than actively trading them. The volatility on this is just too much for me, but it's certainly a lot of fun to watch. So with that, I want to thank everyone for joining the call live. I always appreciate you guys showing up to these daily technical analysis calls. If you get value out of this, like, subscribe, share this wherever you want to share it, and take a look at all the free resources that I've created in the DeFi University school community, and also in the DeFi University on the website there. All the courses there. Oh yeah, Twinkle Bell is talking about go over Arrow. Sure, we can take a look at Arrow real quick just to wrap things up. So Arrow is a reward token. Arrow is an extremely inflationary reward token. So here's the weekly chart of Arrow. Now, the level of support here is 28 cents. But if Bitcoin moves to 60K and ETH moves to 1600 and Solana breaks 95 and moves towards 30, let's say, do you think that Arrow is going to hold 28 cents? I certainly don't. And this pattern here, it's just amazing that Arrow ever rallied at all because it's an inflationary reward token. There's really no use case for this. It doesn't do anything. So I think it probably breaks below 28 cents and maybe finds support at 10 cents, something like that. Here's why I think that. Take a look at Black. So Black is the reward token for the Black Hole DEX over there on, so Black USD, I think that's what I got to do. Black, there it is, Black Protocol. So this is, so I don't know that this is the right token. Black USD, just want to click on crypto. And I'm looking for, yeah, I think this is it on Avalanche. Perfect. So this is what I kind of expect out of Arrow just moving forward, just down and to the right, like just does nothing but go down. And that's what it should do, though, because, this is a VE33 DEX, and this is the Black token is the reward token for that VE33 DEX. Aerodrome is a VE33 DEX. Arrow is the reward token. So the fact that Arrow has pumped it all is probably just a result of, Coinbase investing in Aerodrome and then speculators coming in. But I think that Arrow probably ends up doing something like this moving forward. There's really no reason to hold it. And it is inflationary. It should go to, maybe a couple of pennies, something like that. So I hope that that was useful for you. And I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up. Thanks so much, everyone. And I will see you all tomorrow.